Before I get into the themes of this movie, I would like to add that the ending points in the screen time argument will be covered in more detail when I critique the directorial style of the film. That being said, on to the themes of this multi-million-dollar beast. Nuclear holocaust was one of the pivotal themes that made me respect Godzilla as a pop culture icon even more. While the marketing seemed to convey a movie similar to 1954, Godzilla 2014's cast and crew dealt with the subject in a different manner. The Mutos in the movie are symbolic of nuclear disarmament, being as they actively seek out nuclear reserves in any way, shape, or form. They munch on nukes, they wreck nuclear power plants, and they destroy naval vessels carrying nuclear reactors. I admit that this was one of the things that initially turned me away from the movie originally, because despite the godly teaser and the various interviews saying that Godzilla would be back to his menacing and destructive roots, Godzilla doesn't represent any of the nuclear symbolism one would expect to find in 1954. Therein lies another problem for this movie. Godzilla, a symbol of mankind's complicity in their own destruction, a metaphor for the bomb, is now a spokesmonster for the nuclear status quo. Okay, sure, I know it sounds outlandish, but think about it. In 1954's film, it was theorized that Godzilla was a byproduct of man's tampering with a force beyond their control, that he was as much a victim of the atomic age as the rest of us. He was nature's way of answering the bomb. In 2014's film, Godzilla is part of a cover-up where the bomb detonated on Bikini Atoll, which caused the Lucky Dragon No. 5 incident in real history, was actually meant to kill Godzilla. Monarch, the same multinational coalition that kept his existence secret, was therefore part of a joint venture in the movie to kill Godzilla. Godzilla's origins were also rewritten to where he lived in an age when the Earth was 10 times more radioactive than it is today. Therefore, he feeds off of radiation naturally, just like the Mutos. But what's different with Godzilla? Godzilla sleeps in the ocean and absorbs radiation from the planet's core. To summarize, instead of being a monster meant to be a walking nuke with a pulse, Godzilla's new origins make it so humanity holds no responsibility for him being what he is. He won't actively seek out nuclear reserves because he's naturally equipped to feed off of them from volcanic vents on the ocean floor. Hence, everything that Godzilla stood for is null and void and passed on to the Mutos. The fact that Godzilla isn't a byproduct of humanity messing around with atomic fission does make him more of a hero character, but it diminishes the impact of the anti-nuclear message that was so prevalent in Japan in 1954, where the general feeling about nukes would be mostly negative at best. Thus, Godzilla 2014 could only be American and made by explicitly ignoring his previous thematic pulls. This is further evidenced by the climax of the film where the nuke detonates and not a speck of fallout is seen in the city thereafter. It would have been nice to tie that in with how Godzilla miraculously comes back to life. I would also like to add that because the joint venture to kill Godzilla was done as part of a multinational cover-up, this could, in theory, be what starts the Cuban Missile Crisis in this movie's universe. After all, who wouldn't want to carry the title of the country that killed Godzilla? That would be some American self-insert masturbatory material, however, if they fictionally shift the blame for all post-World War II actions onto trying to kill Godzilla. Not that I think that's the goal of the movie, but that would be a horrible thing if people actually thought that. That was my biggest problem with the movie. It raised too many questions that make it a cancer to both history and the franchise over here in America. But at the same time, like the screen time argument, this does work. The thing to remember is that this is an American Godzilla film, and America has a hard time accepting anything radioactive as bad.
Oh my God, who the hell cares?
Unless, of course, you count Oliver Stone and Michael Douglas, who have emphasized it quite often. Stanley Kubrick need not apply. Making this film would mean America has to accept their faults in certain events. Fukushima Daiichi power plant was built with American resources. The Lucky Dragon No. 5 incident has to be accepted. Without it, and many other events, Godzilla wouldn't exist. So this is a good example of both Japan and America coming to terms with their past, as well as symbolizing the irony of atomic weaponry. We have created weapons so destructive that they could end all life on Earth, but at the same time we look to those same weapons for salvation at the last second. This is also important in the desire for the military to nuke Godzilla and the Mutos later on, because the nuclear energy woke up these creatures, but they now look to the bombs for salvation, like in 1954. History is repeating itself. Serizawa even states this.
We tried that before.
Megatons, not kilotons. Nothing can withstand that blast.
When a Godzilla movie needs a certain sense of gravitas, it will use the nuclear theme as a backdrop to make it all the more serious. With Godzilla 2014, despite his altered origins, another theme comes into play: man versus nature. Even something as simple as the USS Nautilus reaching the lower depths and waking up Godzilla is symbolic of this, because in the 1950s, man was living in a world he didn't fully understand, and we still don't understand that same world today. In the film itself, this overarching theme not only applies to Godzilla, but carries over to the human drama. Joe Brody, who works at the Janjira power plant, tries to explain that earthquakes are not the cause of the reactor meltdown, and faces extreme ridicule by both the Japanese government and his own son for thinking so. Ford has accepted the generalized theory that the reactor meltdown was a natural disaster, and has in turn started a family in San Francisco while working as an EOD for the Navy. Through various turns of events, Ford heads to Japan and attempts to see his father through on his mission to uncover the truth. When Joe's theory reaches a crescendo, Ford learns a key point his father tried to make: monsters exist in the world. When Joe tells him that he needs to go to his family and keep them safe, Ford attempts to board a plane in Hawaii, only to be caught in the middle of Godzilla's fight with the male Muto. Ford then decides to return to his work as a soldier. Many fans and critics have argued that this is doing nothing to help his family, but I disagree. His job is now more important than ever to him because it represents that he needs to respond to his job both to protect the nation, the world, and his family. He doesn't want history to repeat itself, therefore he gladly volunteers on every mission he comes across to see it through and stop the monsters. Godzilla on the monster plot side of things is symbolic of nature correcting itself. Only nature can defeat nature. Godzilla in the 2014 film is the top of the food chain, an ancient alpha predator. By destroying the Mutos, he not only restores balance, but represents that man cannot even hope to predict or destroy what they do not understand. Godzilla is a force of nature in this film, and when the military attempts to kill him and the Mutos, their failures make them relent, and instead of actively engaging the monsters, they decide to extract the nuke in the hopes that Godzilla will indeed correct the social hierarchy. At the same time, however, I would like to argue that a good majority of the film's plot holes revolve around Ford's decisions. Briefly to point out, he doesn't set the timer right on the nuke in Nevada, which in turn causes the entire third act to happen. Despite talking himself up as an EOD, he's not able to successfully defuse the bomb, and the military says as far as the nuke hunt mission in San Francisco,
If you don't walk out, you don't come back at all.
Yet they fly a chopper in and extract him moments before the nuke detonates. However, Ford still manages to be pivotal in the monster action in some ways. His own problem decisions do cause the final fight to happen, but he makes up for it by burning up the Muto nest, a distraction long enough for Godzilla to get the drop on them, and by getting the boat out to sea. His very existence mirrors that of his father because his family life is filled with neglect towards his own son, which is why he himself joined the Navy in theory. He wasn't learning from his father. At the very end, when the female Muto corners him, all seems lost. The monsters that caused the death of his parents might come full circle and kill him and his family, as well as all of San Francisco now. Janjira looks like it will happen again. But then Godzilla saves him, and both the monster storyline and human storylines are balanced by the end. History doesn't repeat itself by the end of the movie. Thus, despite its flaws at face value, this movie does hold some thematic weight in its proceedings. It can be argued that commenting on the imagery reminiscent of Fukushima, the Indian Ocean tsunami, and 9/11 doesn't happen, thus causing the film to look like an endless cesspool of special effects, but the audience is meant to make those connections thematically, and a good majority of audiences did miss that point. Does this mean that they were adrenaline junkies? No, it merely means that there were some points that just flew right over their heads. Does this mean that Godzilla 2014 is not an action movie? No, it has its fair share of monster action when it's necessary. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that thematically, despite Godzilla 2014 not having the same execution and theme as the original 1954 film, it does hold its own weight in how we conduct ourselves in today's world.